Hey everyone, so this is part two of my Pink Floyd countdown. I'm ranking all the studio records. Yes, soundtracks count, as you can see behind me. That is a soundtrack to More. They count as long as they are an entire album and there isn't another artist on them. And there's only two in my mind that fit that bill. And before we get started, just a little bit about my criteria or how I did this. So this is, obviously the studio records have to fit that definition. I did include all versions of Pink Floyd, going from Sid Barrett all the way to The Endless River, the last record officially by Pink Floyd. The way as far as ranking them goes, I kind of made a list of the 15, and I've played around with it quite a bit as I've discovered these records. But I found myself really focusing on 11 through 15, what was in there, but also trailing into some of these records, trying to figure out and swapping some around, like what goes where. Have a pretty good idea from the start of what my top five is, although the order kind of remains to be seen as I go into listening to those more. But this is the middle section. So this is albums number 10 through 6. So this is a really interesting record. This is Pink Floyd's third studio record. It is a soundtrack to a movie called More, but it functions as a record. There's a lot of instrumental tracks on here. Most of this record kind of has a nice mood to it. It's a little mellower. I think David Gilmour sings all the songs on here. There's some great classic songs on here that were done in the early version of Pink Floyd, and I find this period so fascinating. This version post Sid Barrett and before Dark Side of the Moon, and songs like Green is a Color and Cymbeline were done quite a bit live, either in the Man in the Journey live thing they did, or some BBC sessions, and some of those box sets of Pink Floyd. You can hear these things. And I think both these songs are great, especially Cymbeline. It is just such a nice kind of pop song, and one that I hadn't really paid that much attention to. So that was kind of a highlight listening to this. And of course, it has two songs on here that really kind of break up the sound of being kind of a nice, mellow Pink Floyd record with a lot of instrumentals. And that is the Nile song, the heaviest song Pink Floyd's ever done. And Ibiza Bar, which is kind of the flip side to it, the B-side. And in fact, the single release in France and New Zealand had the Nile song as side A and Ibiza Bar as side B. I always think about, there had to be somebody who bought that single and thought that was Pink Floyd, and must have been in for a little bit of a shock as they dove deeper into the Pink Floyd's catalog and found out that kind of almost heavy metal is not what, or hard rock at least, is not really what Pink Floyd's all about. But like I said, I really like Green as a Color. I love the Nile song. I mean, standing at the Nile, like I kind of want to go visit. I do. I mean, I like to just because it's an important part of the world. But see the Nile River, and I have a feeling that song would be going through my head as I'm standing at the Nile, if I ever get to do that someday. Yeah, that's a highlight. Crying Song, I think, is a highlight. That's kind of more of a not so well-known song. And Green is a Color, Cymbeline, and some of these instrumentals, they just work really nicely. It's an album you can put on. It'll take you on a little bit of a journey. It's somewhat unexpected, and it just plays through really nicely. It's the first Pink Floyd record where they stepped out of Sid Barrett's shadow completely. He's not on here at all. It's a good record, probably in some ways the most underrated of Pink Floyd records, because very few people seem to talk about this record. But More by Pink Floyd. It is, of all the albums I've counted down so far, it is probably the one that I have, in a way, spent the most time with or been the most in awe of, because I just didn't know it that well. 1969's More at number 10. Up next, we have at number 9, I have the album from 1970, Atom Heart Mother by Pink Floyd. This is one of their most iconic album covers, probably after The Wall and Dark Side of the Moon. This is the one if you're going to mention a Pink Floyd album cover. Or, well, they have so many good album covers. I forgot about Animals in there and Wish You Were Here. But this is one of those iconic covers. I think it's their first iconic cover, put it that way. But this album is a little difficult for me, and as I'm talking, I almost wish that there's part of me that just really, really wrestled between this one and More as far as placement goes. I think I'll keep this one where it is though, and that's because there are 3 really good songs on it that kind of move the needle and kind of advance Pink Floyd into the band that we know now, or that we would know from Dark Side of the Moon forward. And especially If by Roger Waters, his song on here, very personal, little political, kind of Roger Waters territory that he minds going forward, but also his signature vocal style is really on here for the first time. And it's like a lovely, more acoustic song. So much of this mid period is kind of slow and more acoustic than what they would do later. But I find If to be a really, really good song, and to me, the first real standout Roger Waters song. We clearly know it's Roger Waters. You clearly hear his voice that we all know, and really get a glimpse into his songwriting. Also, Summer 68 is pretty decent by Richard Wright on here. These are all on the second side. And Fat Old Son is phenomenal by David Gilmour. Really, really killer song. The first one, again, where like he writes it and you really get a feel for what his style is. Not as pronounced as Roger Waters, because we've heard him sing lead vocals on a lot of Pink Floyd songs and albums up through this, or to this. But you really get a flair for his style much more than you ever did on like Alma Gumma, or certainly Saucer Full of Secrets. The reason why this album isn't higher is because of the 2 other songs. There's a experimental song called Atom Heart Mother, which is on the A side of this record, takes up a whole side. And I find it to be really underwhelming. I guess the band recorded it, fairly lengthy song, and handed it off to Ron Geeson, and he came up with the classical parts over it, and that's louder than the actual band track. It's interesting, but I don't find it doesn't move me at all. It's not really something I ever really desire to hear after I've played it, and in fact sometimes I've interrupted the needle and just taken it off. It feels really inconsequential. Part of that is just the name titles. The titles of the songs are just sort of plays on the album cover, like just lends further thought to the fact that they weren't really taking this too seriously. But the real misstep for me on this record is Alan's Psychedelic Breakfast. Okay, cool, you're 18, 19 years old, you buy Atom Heart Mother, you put it on, it's got the cool cover, and oh my god, this is great. They're like cooking breakfast and writing songs, their songs are playing, and then you hear the roadies making breakfast. It's really something you just kind of want to listen to once. And for me, in a way, it's a wonder I ranked this album so high, because there's just 3 songs on it I really like, out of one very long song and another pretty long song at the end of it. But those 3 songs are pretty killer. So it's from 1970, Atom Heart Mother by Pink Floyd. Okay, number 8. Final Cut. This is from 1983. This is Pink Floyd's last studio record before Roger Waters was out and David Gilmour would reform the band a few years later. Now, as I explained before in my last video, I think so much of your appreciation for a legendary band like Pink Floyd, if you're around, especially during their years of being active, is where you jump on board. So for me, it was The Wall. And this is very much a sister album to The Wall. And I used to really, really like this record. In fact, it would have been in my top 5 had I done this countdown like 20 years ago, or especially if I'd done it 30 years ago. Absolutely. I find it hasn't aged quite as well, but I'm not one to diss on the Final Cut. I think it's a much better record than the one I was just talking about, Atom Heart Mother. Now, this is clearly a vision of one guy. This is Roger Waters. This is tackling some of these songs were left over from The Wall, the more personal songs, a lot of them. I know David Gilmour vetoed at least one because he thought it was too personal, too much about Roger Waters and not as much about the overall concept. But so Waters had these songs. They were originally going to put out a record called Spare Bricks, which is going to be leftovers from The Wall. And then Roger Waters decided he wanted to make a full record, a new record. And part of it was the inspiration from the Falklands War, which he was totally against, and it kind of woke him up politically. This album, The Final Cut, has a subtitle or additional title, Requiem for the Post-War Dream. And he really does take the world, or Britain, to task for the modern world and what we have and all the problems we still have, that maybe the optimists thought a big world war like World War II would end. And his father died in World War II, and this incredibly personal record for Roger Waters. This is not a record that you put on in the car when you're driving around. I tried that recently, like last week. I was trying to listen to this a few times before I decide where to put it. And that did not work. That does not work. This is also not an album that really works for individual songs. Maybe not now, John, but you generally don't pick out songs from this and put it on a playlist of Pink Floyd songs or a best of collection. It is an album. It is an album. It is an album, full stop. It is the piece of music that demands to be listened to in one sitting with the gatefold open and reading the lyrics and really immersing yourself in Roger Waters' world. Incredibly personal record, incredibly anti-war record, really amazing look at society. My only real complaint about this record, well, there's a couple of them, of course. One of them, lyrically wise, is I just wish he hadn't talked about Margaret Thatcher by name. It ages the record a little bit. I think he's better when he talks about general things, specific, but also keeping it very general. And I feel like using some of these politicians' names like that kind of keep this album from being maybe as legendary as it could be. I read recently that Nick Mason actually asked Waters, suggested that instead of using Maggie, What Have We Become, or all those call outs to Thatcher, that they would create an instrumental part over that with a melody. I think that would have been a brilliant decision. But the other big complaint about this record is that it's a Roger Waters solo album in all but name. Yes and no. You could definitely say that about David Gilmour in A Momentary Lapse of Reason. I mean, that is studio musicians playing with him, and a little bit of Nick Mason and just a dash of Richard Wright, and that's it. This album, the whole band does play on this. I should say the whole band that was existent at the time. And now Richard Wright had been kicked out after the Wall, or during the Wall. But the three of them, Nick Mason, Roger Waters, and David Gilmour, are on this record. It's not like it's studio musicians, but it's very much Roger Waters' mission. I think some of the band members are going through personal problems. I think David Gilmour's light on inspiration wasn't really bringing in songs. Roger Waters ran with his concept, and a lot of it tends to be a lot quieter than other Pink Floyd records, kind of acoustic bass, piano bass, amazing saxophone in this record. But you don't hear Gilmour kind of rising to the occasion with amazing guitar work on most of the songs. It's there on about 3 or 4 of them, but it's a serious album, and it demands attention, and it's not something like Wish You Were Here or even Dark Side of the Moon that you can just throw on the turntable. But I do think it deserves attention, and I think it is way, way underrated, especially the way people talk about it today. And frankly, listen to a record like this, it might teach us something right now. Number seven, Obscured by Clouds. This album is interesting. This album is also very underrated, and it's crazy when you think about this record due to its proximity to Dark Side of the Moon. This record, another soundtrack album, it was done with the same film director, Barbette Schroeder, who directed more, also directed a movie called La Vallée, and this is the soundtrack to it. I guess there was some kind of falling out, so Pink Floyd called it Obscured by Clouds rather than giving it the movie title. But this album was recorded while they were recording Dark Side of the Moon, or during a break from it. They'd already began Dark Side of the Moon when they took on this project, and apparently the studio sessions were fairly rushed. They wrote most of the stuff in the studio. It has a really laid-back, kind of hazy vibe to it. It's got way more vocal songs on it than something like More did. And with the exception of the first 2 songs, which I find just sound like soundtrack songs and don't really do much for me, and kind of set a mood for the record that is really not carried through, kind of this proggy sound that's not really carried through to the rest of the record. I think it does it a disservice, honestly. I mean, if you're coming to this record and you listen to those first 2 songs, you're 5 minutes in or more before you realize that, oh, this shifts gears, and the rest of the album is kind of in the same kind of mellow sort of mode. Sounds a lot like outtakes from Dark Side of the Moon. David Gilmour singing most of the songs, which are right on one, taking on some heavy topics, but also kind of keeping it light with a song like Stay. One of my highlights is Free 4 by Waters. Yeah, I think it's a great album. It's super underrated, like I said. It's something to listen to, and if I was listening to it, next time I listen to it, I would recommend anybody else that maybe has had a problem with it in the past, start on song 3, play it all the way through. But I'm sure some people love those first 2 songs as well. But what an interesting record to have a break from your soon to be absolutely crazy huge record to do this other record and kind of intentionally keep the stakes low because you know you've got this masterpiece coming. And even when it comes to the album cover, I guess with the album cover, they told, I think it was Hypnosis again, to like not spend so much time on it. And I think they'd rejected some album covers because they were too good. They didn't want this taking up tons of attention. They wanted that attention saved for Dark Side of the Moon. So interesting record, 1972's Obscured by Clouds. Okay, so what do we have at number 6, the final one in this countdown? Meddle, Pink Floyd Meddle from 1971. This is the original album cover. This is the version I had for years. And everybody would say, oh, it's an ear. I was like, what do you mean it's an ear? And I just could not see it. Now, I did have the cassette too. That would kind of explain things a little bit. But even when you look at this, if you saw it for the first time, I don't know if you would realize that. I think the reissued one is more faithful to maybe the British one, where, oh, it's an ear. Of course it's an ear. Well, now I know it's an ear, but it's not so apparent on that other one. This album is sort of the album that made Pink Floyd kind of what they became in their glory years. In some ways, it's the first record that does that. After stumbling and kind of doing soundtracks, but some really amazing songs with records like Saucer Full of Secrets and Omagoma and More and Atom Heart Mother, then they finally they make this record. And from the beginning, you can just tell it's something different. I mean, right away, one of these days, it announces itself that this is an amazing instrumental. This is an amazing powerhouse of a band, if nothing else. It's mostly an instrumental song, other than when Nick Mason says, one of these days, I'm going to smash you into little pieces. Great song. The next song, A Pillow of Winds, is a nice acoustic song that I always seem to forget about. David Gilmour singing on that one. But then, to me, there are 2 highlights, and the first highlight is Fearless. Fearless might be one of my favorite Pink Floyd songs, especially a song you could take out of the context of a record and just have it work great. I love the lyrics. It's uplifting. It's like just the whole attitude of just go for it. Like, they laugh at you now, but they won't very long. Won't for very long. I love that guitar riff. I just can never seem to get enough of it. Kind of like Free 4, but I think this is a much better song. I remember seeing the band Low play this at a theater in St. Paul, Minnesota, and it absolutely blew me away. And even the chanting at the end, I think, works. I love, love, love Fearless. I think it's, if you were to rank Pink Floyd top 10 songs, I think it would be in there for me for sure. And then you have kind of a jokey song, kind of like what you would do on Amagama or Atom Heart Mother, but I like this song. I like Seamus. I like the fact that a dog can sing. I think that's amazing. And in Pompeii, the movie, they bring in a different dog that does a vocal part, along with David Gilmour. Yeah, I think it's a fun song. It's not like Alan's Psychedelic Breakfast or the songs on Amagama where I feel like I have to skip them completely. I rather enjoy it. And then you get to probably what would be considered their first epic, their first like masterpiece epic, and that's Echoes. Pink Floyd Echoes has just everything that Dark Side of the Moon would become just a couple years later. Killer instrumentals, a song that takes you on a journey, amazing lyrics that you can't quite put your finger on. It kind of feels out of time, both subject matter and lyrically, and the sound of it, and but has kind of a uplifting message, I think, compared to a lot of Pink Floyd records or songs. Yeah, it's great. It's like 22 minutes of just Pink Floyd at their absolute best. So yeah, Meddle for me, number 6, 1971. Thanks for checking this out. There's one more, or there's actually two more. I'm doing one more video, which will be number 5 through number 1 in this countdown. But then after that, I'm going to watch Live at Pompeii in IMAX and hopefully get a chance to hear the soundtrack. And then I want to follow up those experiences with another video to cap this all off. Although, who knows? I kind of want to watch those movies, those Barbette Schroeder movies, and maybe do a video about that too. It's been kind of crazy getting into them as much as I have recently, because they're not a band that I ever like tackled their entire catalog. Certain records speak to me at different times, and it's been really cool, especially this middle period of post Syd Barrett and pre Dark Side of the Moon, to really get to know some of these records. And I must say, if there's one period of Pink Floyd that I think would be really serviced by like a collection of songs, like a compilation, I think it would be this period, because there's so many good standout songs on albums that, you know, might be a little flawed and may not be that cohesive, but you could put together a killer collection of songs from this era. Absolutely. But I think everybody kind of knows what's coming up next. There are some records I've not talked about, including records from a very, very classic period of Pink Floyd. So please leave a comment and let me know what your ranking is, or especially what you think of these records. I'm sure I missed some things. I'm sure some of you, these might be your favorites. I would love to hear that. But yeah, I'll do the next one pretty soon here. So thanks for watching.